The hardest part of being a parent is pretending everything is fine when you are not sure how you will make it through tomorrow. Sarah Mitchell whispered those words to herself as she stood alone in the small kitchen of her apartment just after sunrise. The refrigerator door remained open as she stared silently at the nearly empty shelves. A half-gallon of milk sat beside a few eggs and a package of bread that would not last much longer. The cold air drifted across her face, but it did nothing to ease the growing worry in her chest. Behind her, the sound of small footsteps echoed through the hallway. 8-year-old Noah appeared first, rubbing sleep from his eyes, followed by 6-year-old Lily, whose favorite stuffed rabbit hung loosely from her arm. "What are we having for dinner tonight, Mom?" Noah asked with the innocent optimism only a child could have. Sarah forced a smile. "I will think of something." It was the same answer she had given more than once that month. The children accepted it without question and hurried toward the table. Sarah turned back toward the refrigerator, hoping they would not notice how little food remained. After breakfast, she walked them to school beneath a gray Ohio sky. The autumn air carried a chill that hinted winter was not far away. As the children disappeared through the school entrance, Sarah remained on the sidewalk for several seconds, watching until they were completely out of sight. Then she opened her banking application on her phone. The balance stared back at her. $4.17. She closed her eyes. Rent was overdue. Utilities were due next week. Her part-time cleaning jobs barely covered transportation costs. For months, she had stretched every dollar farther than she thought possible, but now there was almost nothing left to stretch. Back at the apartment, Sarah searched every drawer, every purse, every forgotten coat pocket. She collected loose change from a jar near the window and counted it carefully. Even after adding everything together, the total barely changed. She sat at the kitchen table and lowered her head into her hands. The apartment felt unusually quiet. On the wall hung family photographs from happier years. In one picture, she stood beside a smiling man on their wedding day. Sarah looked away. That chapter of her life had ended long ago, but some reminders remained. As the afternoon sunlight drifted through the blinds, she opened a small wooden drawer that she rarely touched. Inside sat a velvet box. Her heart tightened immediately. She already knew what was inside before opening it. The wedding ring rested exactly where she had left it years earlier. The gold band caught the light as she lifted it into her palm. Memories returned instantly. Promises, dreams, hope, a future she once believed would last forever. Sarah swallowed hard. The ring was not valuable because of money. It was valuable because it represented a life she had once imagined. Yet as she thought about Noah and Lily, another reality became impossible to ignore. Food mattered more than memories. Survival mattered more than sentiment. She closed her fingers around the ring and stared quietly out the window. Tears threatened to form, but she blinked them away. Tomorrow her children would need breakfast. Tomorrow they would still depend on her. Slowly, she placed the ring back into the velvet box and set it on the table. For several long seconds, she simply looked at it. Then she made a decision she never thought she would have to make. The next morning, she would take the ring to a pawn shop. Sarah Mitchell stepped into the busy streets of downtown Cleveland, her mind racing as she clutched the small velvet box tightly in her purse. The crisp autumn air bit at her cheeks as she navigated through the crowd, dodging commuters and street vendors alike, all oblivious to the quiet desperation she carried within. Every few steps, she glanced down at the box, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. She had spent the night thinking about alternatives, calling friends, and even considering taking on another cleaning shift, but nothing would provide enough money to cover the rent and feed Noah and Lily for the week. As she approached the corner pawn shop, the familiar neon sign flickered above the doorway, casting a soft glow on the wet sidewalk from the previous night's rain. Taking a deep breath, Sarah pushed the door open, the small bell ringing to announce her entrance. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and polished metal, and the quiet hum of conversation between clerks and customers filled the space. A middle-aged man behind the counter looked up and offered a polite nod, his expression neutral yet welcoming. Sarah walked forward slowly, placing the velvet box gently on the counter, her fingers trembling slightly. "I would like to sell this," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The man opened the box carefully, examining the gold wedding ring within, turning it over in his hands as he inspected its quality and weight. Sarah watched silently, her chest tight, recalling memories of her wedding day, the smiles, the laughter, the promise of a future she had once envisioned. Now, those memories were dwarfed by the urgent need to provide for her children. After a moment, the clerk looked up and gave her an offer that was fair but modest, considering the simplicity of the ring. Sarah nodded, swallowing back a lump in her throat, and accepted the offer. He handed her a small stack of bills, and she counted them quickly, her heart pounding with both relief and lingering sorrow. This money would cover groceries and a few extra necessities for Noah and Lily, at least until her next paycheck. As she left the shop, the weight in her purse was now heavier with cash, yet lighter with the burden of impossible choices. The city felt different now, more hopeful somehow, and the crisp air seemed to invigorate her resolve. She headed straight to the local grocery store, carefully choosing items that would provide nutrition and comfort for her children, thinking about their smiles and the relief she could offer them. While the transaction had been necessary, Sarah felt a strange mixture of pride and vulnerability, knowing that sometimes sacrifice was the purest form of love, and that in these quiet, difficult moments, the strength of a parent shone the brightest. As evening settled over the city, Sarah Mitchell carried 2 grocery bags through the front door of her apartment. The moment Noah and Lily saw the food, their faces brightened. To them, it was simply dinner. To Sarah, it represented another week of survival. She unpacked every item carefully, placing canned vegetables, pasta, bread, and a few small treats into the kitchen cabinets. Lily smiled when she spotted a box of cookies, and Noah immediately offered to help prepare dinner. Watching them laugh together around the small kitchen table eased some of the sadness she still felt about the ring. For that evening at least, her children would go to bed with full stomachs. Later that night, after Noah and Lily had fallen asleep, Sarah sat alone by the window with a cup of tea. The apartment was quiet except for the occasional sound of traffic passing below. Her thoughts drifted back to the pawn shop. She wondered whether she had done the right thing, but deep down she already knew the answer. Parents did not always have the luxury of choosing what hurt less. Sometimes they simply chose what helped their children most. Across town, the pawn shop had nearly closed for the evening. The man who had purchased the ring was named Michael Carter. At 48 years old, he had spent more than 2 decades running the family-owned shop. Thousands of items had passed through his hands over the years. Most were forgotten within days. Yet as he completed paperwork and organized inventory for the night, he found himself glancing once more at the small gold ring resting on his desk. Something about it continued to hold his attention. He picked it up again and examined it beneath a brighter lamp. The ring itself was simple. No expensive diamonds. No extraordinary craftsmanship. Yet it felt different from many of the items that came through the store. Michael slowly rotated it between his fingers. Then he noticed something he had overlooked earlier. Along the inside of the band appeared a faint engraving. Time and where had nearly erased it. Curious, he retrieved a magnifying glass from a nearby drawer. Under closer inspection, the words became visible. The engraving was not a date or a pair of initials as he expected. Instead, it contained a short message. Michael read it once. Then he read it again. His expression changed immediately. The words seemed strangely familiar. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ring. Memories stirred somewhere in the back of his mind. He could not yet place them, but the feeling was unmistakable. The message connected to something from years ago, something important. Michael set the ring down carefully and opened his computer. Most shop transactions ended the moment customers walked out the door. This one suddenly felt different. He pulled up the sales record and reviewed the information Sarah had provided during the transaction. Her name appeared on the screen. Sarah Mitchell. Michael quietly repeated it to himself. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the storefront windows. The shop felt unusually still. He looked at the ring one more time and then back at the computer screen. Whatever connection he sensed, he could not ignore it. Meanwhile, Sarah remained unaware that anyone was thinking about her at all. She slept peacefully for the first time in days, believing the difficult chapter had ended with the sale. But across town, Michael continued studying the faded engraving. The more he looked at it, the more convinced he became that the ring carried a story far greater than $12. And before locking the shop for the night, he made a decision. He was going to learn more about the woman who had walked away from it. The following morning, Michael Carter arrived at his pawn shop earlier than usual. The ring remained exactly where he had left it on his desk, resting beneath the warm glow of a small lamp. Before unlocking the front door, he picked it up once more and examined the faded engraving inside the band. The words continued to stir a memory he could not quite reach. Over the years, he had learned to trust his instincts, and something about this situation felt unfinished. After opening the store, he found himself distracted throughout the morning. Customers came and went, transactions were completed, and inventory was organized, yet his thoughts repeatedly returned to Sarah Mitchell. During a quiet moment, Michael reviewed the transaction record again. He was not interested in invading anyone's privacy. He simply wanted to understand why the ring and its message felt so familiar. Later that afternoon, he stepped out for lunch and happened to pass a small grocery store a few blocks away. As he approached the entrance, he noticed a woman helping two children load grocery bags into an older sedan parked near the curb. At first, he did not recognize her. Then he realized it was Sarah. She looked tired but focused, carefully making sure the children were buckled in before placing the final bag into the trunk. Michael remained across the street and watched for only a moment. What struck him was not poverty or hardship. It was the obvious care she showed her children. Every movement reflected attention and responsibility. Before driving away, the little girl hugged Sarah around the waist, causing both of them to smile. The simple interaction stayed with Michael long after the car disappeared into traffic. Back at the shop, he could not stop thinking about what he had witnessed. Most people who entered his store sold possessions because they wanted extra money. Sarah had looked different. She had looked like someone carrying the weight of an entire family. That evening, Michael did something he rarely did. He began searching public records and professional directories. He was surprised by how little information he found. Sarah lived quietly. She worked multiple part-time jobs. There were no signs of extravagance, complaints, or requests for assistance. Everything suggested someone who handled difficulties privately. Then Michael discovered something else. Several years earlier, Sarah had volunteered regularly at a community center that supported struggling families. According to archived local articles, she spent countless hours helping organize food drives and school supply programs, despite facing financial challenges herself. Michael leaned back in his chair and stared at the screen. Most people in difficult circumstances focused entirely on their own survival. Yet Sarah had somehow found ways to help others. The discovery deepened his curiosity. As evening approached, he picked up the ring again. This time he focused entirely on the engraved message. Suddenly, a fragment of memory surfaced. Not a complete memory, just a moment. A conversation. A difficult day many years ago. Someone offering encouragement when it was desperately needed. Michael sat upright. The connection was still incomplete, but for the first time he felt certain the engraving was tied to a real event from his own past. He carefully placed the ring back into its box and closed the lid. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty street. Sarah spent that same evening helping Noah with homework while Lily colored pictures beside the kitchen table. She remained completely unaware that a stranger was quietly piecing together fragments of a story connected to her life. Meanwhile, Michael realized he was no longer investigating a piece of jewelry. He was uncovering the story of a woman whose kindness seemed to extend far beyond her own struggles, and the closer he looked, the more convinced he became that their lives had crossed paths long before she ever walked into his shop. For the next several days, Michael Carter found himself returning again and again to the small collection of information he had gathered about Sarah Mitchell. What began as simple curiosity had evolved into something much deeper. Every new detail painted a picture of a woman who quietly carried responsibilities that would overwhelm many people. She worked long hours, stretched every dollar carefully, and somehow still found ways to help others whenever she could. One afternoon, Michael visited the community center where Sarah had once volunteered. He did not mention the ring or the pawn shop. Instead, he asked general questions about volunteer programs from previous years. The director smiled immediately when Sarah's name came up. She was one of the most dependable people we ever had, the woman said. Even when she was struggling herself, she always showed up. If someone needed help, Sarah was usually the first person to offer it. Michael listened quietly. The description matched everything he had already begun to suspect. As he prepared to leave, the director shared one more story. Several years earlier, a severe winter storm had disrupted transportation throughout the city. A young man had become stranded near the community center after losing both his wallet and access to his phone. According to the director, most people were focused on their own problems that day. Sarah, however, spent hours helping the stranger contact family members and arrange temporary assistance. She never asked for recognition, the director said. She just wanted to make sure he was okay. Michael froze. The memory that had been lingering at the edge of his mind suddenly became clearer. He remembered that storm. He remembered the fear and uncertainty he had felt. More importantly, he remembered a kind young woman who had refused to walk away when everyone else seemed too busy to stop. As he returned to his car, fragments of the past continued falling into place. At the time, Michael had been going through one of the most difficult periods of his life. Business problems, family responsibilities, and financial pressures had all collided at once. Being stranded that day had felt like the final blow. Then a stranger had appeared and offered help without expecting anything in return. Until now, he had never known her full name. Back at the pawn shop, Michael opened the velvet box once more. He carefully examined the engraving inside the ring. Suddenly, the meaning became completely clear. The message had been inspired by words Sarah had shared during that conversation years ago. Words about perseverance, kindness, and refusing to give up when life became difficult. Michael sat in silence. The realization left him stunned. Sarah had unknowingly helped him during one of his darkest moments, and now she was the one struggling. Yet she had never mentioned the connection when she entered the shop. She probably did not even remember him. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her daily routine completely unaware of the discovery. She worked 2 cleaning shifts that week and spent every evening helping Noah and Lily with school projects. The grocery money from the ring sale was already disappearing faster than she hoped. New bills had arrived. New worries waited around every corner. Yet she faced each day with the same determination. Late one evening, Michael looked around his office and made a decision. Returning the ring suddenly felt like the smallest thing he could do. The woman who had once changed the course of his life deserved more than that. Much more. For the first time since this strange journey began, Michael knew exactly what he needed to do next. He closed the velvet box, stood up from his desk, and prepared to find Sarah. What he planned to offer her would not simply return a piece of jewelry. It would reveal a truth neither of them could have imagined when they first met years ago. The following week began like every other week for Sarah Mitchell. Before sunrise, she prepared breakfast, packed school lunches, and made sure Noah and Lily were ready for class. The routines never changed, but the challenges seemed endless. The money from selling the ring was almost gone. A utility bill sat unopened on the kitchen counter, and rent remained overdue. Yet Sarah refused to let her children see her worry. She smiled when they smiled. She encouraged them when they felt discouraged. No matter how difficult things became, she remained determined to create a sense of stability for them. Across town, Michael Carter was preparing for something entirely different. During the past several days, he had carefully considered how to approach Sarah. He did not want to embarrass her or make her feel like a charity case. The more he learned about her, the more he respected her independence and dignity. He knew that simply showing up with money would miss the point entirely. Sarah had spent years building a life based on hard work and self-respect. If he wanted to help, he needed to do it in a way that honored those values. One afternoon, Michael contacted several professional acquaintances and explained part of Sarah's situation. He spoke about her character, her work ethic, and her history of helping others. What surprised him was how quickly people responded. Some offered employment leads. Others suggested educational opportunities and community resources. A few volunteered to help immediately if needed. Michael realized something important. Sarah's story inspired people because it reflected qualities that many admired but rarely encountered. That evening, Sarah returned home after a long shift. Her feet ached, and exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. As she unlocked the apartment door, she found Noah and Lily waiting excitedly inside. Both children had brought home positive reports from school. For a few precious minutes, the worries of adulthood faded into the background. Sarah celebrated their achievements, helped with homework, and listened carefully as they described their day. Watching them laugh reminded her why she continued fighting through every setback. Later that night, after the children had fallen asleep, she sat alone at the kitchen table reviewing expenses. The numbers simply did not work. She stared at the paper in silence, searching for solutions that seemed impossible to find. Across the city, Michael sat in his office looking at the same velvet box that had started this entire journey. The ring rested inside exactly as it had on the day Sarah sold it. Yet now it represented something completely different. It was no longer merely a wedding ring. It had become a symbol of sacrifice, resilience, and an unexpected connection between two lives. Michael finally reached for his phone. He dialed a number he had received through a professional contact and confirmed one final detail. After ending the call, he smiled for the first time in days. Everything was ready. The next step would require courage, not from Sarah, but from him. The following evening, as darkness settled over the neighborhood, Sarah was helping Lily color pictures at the kitchen table when an unexpected knock sounded at the apartment door. She frowned slightly. Visitors were rare. Noah looked up from his homework. "Are you expecting someone?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. Another knock followed, gentle but deliberate. She stood, walked toward the door, and placed her hand on the handle. On the other side stood a man she recognized immediately. It was Michael Carter. In one hand, he carried a small velvet box. In the other, a sealed envelope. And as Sarah slowly opened the door, she had no idea that the conversation about to begin would change the course of her family's future forever. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, staring at Michael Carter holding the velvet box and the sealed envelope, her mind racing with questions and disbelief. The apartment around her felt impossibly quiet, the only sounds being the soft breathing of her children who sensed the tension yet did not fully understand it. While Michael's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with her whirlwind of emotions, his eyes steady and full of reassurance as he finally spoke, explaining that he had arranged not only a financial gift, but also a job opportunity tailored to her skills and experience, designed to empower her rather than diminish her independence. He described how he had reached out to trusted colleagues and used his connections to create a position that would allow her to support her children with stability and dignity. A role that recognized her sacrifices and hard work. And as Sarah listened, a mix of relief and astonishment washed over her, each word sinking in like the realization that someone had seen her struggle and wanted to help in a meaningful, respectful way, not as charity, but as genuine recognition of her courage. She glanced down at the ring in the box, the same one she had sold for $12, and suddenly understood the full weight of the gesture. It was more than money, more than a job. It symbolized respect, acknowledgement, and a new beginning, a tangible reminder that her past decisions, made out of necessity and love, were honored and that her dignity remained intact. Her voice trembled slightly as she accepted the envelope and the box, the gesture moving her to tears while Michael reassured her gently that nothing about this moment required compromise of her values or self-respect. And as the children looked on curiously, Sarah felt a surge of hope and gratitude that seemed to fill the room, the burden of weeks of stress easing slightly as she realized that her determination and resilience had been noticed and rewarded in a way she had never imagined. And for the first time in a long while, she could envision a future where her family's needs were met and where her efforts were validated not through struggle alone, but through recognition and support. And as they all sat together, talking, laughing softly, and beginning to plan the next steps, the atmosphere shifted from one of tension to anticipation, a quiet sense of possibility settling in. With Michael carefully outlining the path forward, ensuring Sarah understood each opportunity, and as night deepened, the sense of relief and cautious excitement enveloped the apartment, the children still smiling, unaware of the complexities but feeling their mother's renewed strength, while Sarah quietly made a vow to herself to seize this chance, to honor the trust placed in her, and to build a life for her family that reflected both the sacrifices of the past and the promise of a more secure, hopeful future. After Michael Carter left that evening, Sarah Mitchell remained seated at the kitchen table long after Noah and Lily had gone to bed. The velvet box rested beside the sealed envelope, and every few minutes she found herself glancing at them as if they might disappear. The events of the night felt almost impossible to believe. Just weeks earlier, she had been calculating how to stretch $12 into several meals. Now she held an opportunity that could change the direction of her family's future. Slowly, she opened the envelope again and reviewed the documents inside. The position Michael had arranged was not a handout. It was a legitimate role with a local company owned by one of his longtime associates. The salary was fair, the schedule was stable, and the responsibilities matched skills she had developed through years of managing multiple jobs, coordinating schedules, and solving problems under pressure. More importantly, it offered health benefits and room for advancement. For the first time in years, Sarah saw the possibility of building something lasting rather than simply surviving 1 week at a time. The following morning, she woke before sunrise and prepared breakfast as usual. Yet something felt different. The constant knot of anxiety that had lived in her chest for so long seemed slightly smaller. Noah immediately noticed her smile. "Something good happened," he said confidently. Sarah laughed softly. Maybe it did. After dropping the children off at school, she attended a meeting with the company that had extended the offer. The interview felt surprisingly natural. Instead of focusing on her financial struggles, the discussion centered on her abilities, work ethic, and experience. The hiring manager seemed genuinely impressed by her resourcefulness and determination. By the time the meeting ended, Sarah felt hopeful in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. Meanwhile, Michael continued reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them together again. The more he thought about it, the more he appreciated the irony. Years earlier, Sarah had helped him during a moment of uncertainty without expecting anything in return. She likely never imagined that simple act of kindness would remain with him for so many years. Yet it had. In fact, it had influenced decisions he made throughout his life. Her words during that difficult winter day had encouraged him to keep moving forward when giving up seemed easier. A few days later, Michael visited Sarah again, this time with a purpose beyond returning the ring or discussing employment. Sitting at the same kitchen table where she had once worried over unpaid bills, he finally shared the complete story. He described the winter storm, the community center, and the young man who felt lost and overwhelmed. As he spoke, fragments of memory slowly returned to Sarah. Then recognition appeared in her eyes. "That was you?" she asked quietly. Michael nodded. "You probably do not remember much about it," he said. "But I do. You treated me with kindness when you had every reason to focus on your own problems." Sarah sat silently for a moment. She genuinely had not realized the connection. Helping people had never been something she kept score of. She simply did what she thought was right whenever she could. Michael smiled and looked toward the ring resting on the table. "The day you walked into my shop, neither of us knew this story was coming full circle." Sarah looked down at the ring, then back at Michael. For the first time, she fully understood that his return was never really about the jewelry. It was about something far more powerful. It was proof that even the smallest acts of kindness can travel through time in ways we never see, quietly shaping lives until the day they find their way back home. Weeks passed since Sarah Mitchell first received the life-changing offer, and the rhythm of her days began to shift from survival to planning and hope. Each morning, she awoke with renewed energy, organizing breakfast for Noah and Lily with a sense of purpose that had been absent for years. The new job brought more than just financial stability. It offered her confidence and the knowledge that her skills were valued. At work, she found herself thriving, solving problems creatively and earning respect from her colleagues, all while balancing school drop-offs and evening routines with grace. Michael Carter remained a presence in her life, though their interactions were professional and respectful, anchored by a mutual understanding of the past and an unspoken appreciation for the journey that had brought them together again. One bright afternoon, Michael invited Sarah to a community event where he had arranged a small scholarship ceremony for local families in need. Sarah hesitated at first, concerned about drawing attention, but Michael encouraged her gently. She agreed, arriving at the venue with Noah and Lily in tow, each child curious and excited. As they entered, Sarah noticed families similar to her own, parents juggling work and children, quietly striving to provide the best possible life for their loved ones. The warmth of the room reminded her of the small acts of kindness that had shaped her life, from strangers offering a meal to neighbors checking in during tough times. Michael took a moment to introduce Sarah to the audience without revealing the personal story of the ring, highlighting her resilience and dedication to her family as an example for others. The applause felt both humbling and affirming, a reminder that her efforts mattered not just in her own home, but within a broader community. After the ceremony, Michael handed Sarah a carefully wrapped envelope, explaining that it contained resources and opportunities for further education and family support, ensuring her stability and continued growth. The gesture was generous but subtle, emphasizing empowerment over charity. That evening, as Sarah prepared dinner, she reflected on the journey from desperation to security, realizing that the single act of selling her wedding ring had set in motion a chain of events that transformed her family's future. She glanced at Noah and Lily playing quietly nearby, their laughter filling the kitchen with a sense of normalcy and joy she had almost forgotten. She understood that while money and opportunity mattered, the true foundation of their lives was built on perseverance, integrity, and the quiet ripple effects of kindness. Michael's return of the ring and his support had not just restored a piece of jewelry, but had symbolically returned hope, dignity, and the belief that small, selfless actions could catalyze profound change. That night, Sarah journaled her thoughts, capturing the gratitude, lessons, and renewed sense of purpose that would guide her family in the years ahead, knowing that their story, marked by struggle, courage, and unexpected generosity, would serve as inspiration for others navigating the delicate balance of survival and aspiration.